Hi, and welcome to the Olive Branch Community Church. It's great to be with you here today. My name's Kathy, and I'm outside. I hope you're enjoying some of the beauty that's happening outside with the leaves changing, and it's just gorgeous. Anyway, I hope also that you're enjoying our message series based on The Chosen. We're going through season 2 right now, and today Pastor Ken continues that series and basically tries to get at another thing about how we can be more like Jesus. Jesus is completely selfless, but we are completely selfish. So how can we be more like him? So that's the topic of today's message. We hope that you have a wonderful Sunday, and let's spend some time worshiping him.
On the God of Jacob, whose love endures through generations. I know that you will keep your covenant. I'm calling on the God of Moses, the one who opened up the ocean. I need you now to do the same thing for me. Oh God, my God, I need you. Oh God, my God, I need you now. How I need you now. Oh rock of ages, I'm standing on your faithfulness, your faithfulness. I'm calling on the God of Mary, who favor us upon the lowly. I know with you all things are possible. I'm calling on the God of David, who made a shepherd boy courageous. I may not face Goliath, but I've got my own giant. Oh God, my God, I need you. Oh God, my God, I need you now. How I need you now. Oh rock of ages, I'm standing on your faithfulness, your faithfulness. Oh God, my God, I need you. Oh God, my God, I need you now. How I need you now. Oh rock of ages, I'm standing on your faithfulness, your faithfulness. You heard your children then, you hear your children now. You are the same God, you are the same God. You answered prayers back then, and you will answer now. You are the same God, you are the same God. You were providing then, you are providing now. You are the same God, you are the same God. You moved in power then, God move in power now. You are the same God, you are the same God. freed the captives then. You're freeing hearts right now. You are the same God. You are the same God. You touched the leper then. I feel your touch right now. You are the same God. You are the same God.
One of the phrases I use a lot, you probably know this, is losing the plot. And as I use that, I never thought maybe people don't understand what that means. So I thought maybe it would be helpful to define it kind of at the start of this message. So let me do it this way. There was this family, and whenever they had their Thanksgiving ham, they would always cut off the ends of the ham, okay? And when one of the girls, granddaughters, began to trace it back, she talked to her mom about it, said, why do we cut off the ends of the ham? She says, well, I don't know, my mother did it. So went and talked to her grandmother, and she said, I don't know, my mom did it. So she finally got back to the great-grandmother, and she said to her, she says, why do we cut off the ends of the ham? She says, because it didn't fit in the pan. So they've got this whole thing going on that there's something magical about doing that. And what it means to lose the plot is that you start doing things and you don't really even know why you're doing them, and sometimes you get off track with that. One of the perfect examples of this is a woman by the name of Sarah Winchester. Her husband was he was the one that started the whole Winchester repeating rifle. And so, anyways, he died in 1888, and so she inherited the house. And when she got into this house, it was just a very simple ranch-style house, and she just began working on this thing, and she had nonstop construction on it until she died in 1925. The reason she did that was because of her superstition that if she stopped working on the construction, that she would die. I mean, she died anyways. But this house is just incredible. I mean, when you go and look about it, you read it. It's just bizarre, It has 2,000 doors. Some of the openings, some of the doors go nowhere, It has 10,000 windows, some of which come up against brick walls. It has 47 fireplaces, 17 chimneys, 40 stairways. You go up some of these stairways and they end up at a wall. You can't go anywhere. It has 13 bathrooms, 6 kitchens, and 3 elevators and 2 basements. Just massive monstrosity of house. But she lost the plot. A house is to live in, not to try and save your life through some superstition. We just went through the Markham Fair. Some of you probably went there. And we actually found out, that Lori's ancestors moved here in around 1800. So when the fair was started in 1844, I'm guessing that some of her ancestors were there. And I'm guessing it was quite different. I mean, now, you get the biggest pumpkin. So some guy milk feeds this pumpkin and kisses it on the lips every night before he goes to bed, and it gets to be 800 pounds. Now, I don't think anybody would spend their life growing an 800-pound pumpkin back then to win a fair prize. They grew them for pumpkin pies. Tractors. You go to the tractor pull here at the fair, and it's an exciting event, all this smoke and noise and everything like this. These tractors pull a sledge where there's kind of this moving weight on it, and they pull it until they start spinning their tires. My guess is that not a single one of these tractors have ever pulled a plow or ever pulled a cultivator. Same thing with the teams of horses. I mean, it is exciting. They have all these teams of horses, usually about 8 or 9 of them, and they're monstrous horses. They're the Belgians and the Clydesdales and so on. Massive, massive horses. And in these teams, and they pull this sledge that has 600 pounds of rock on it, to see who can pull it the furthest. Well, my guess is that those teams of horses as well have never pulled a plow in their lives, have never pulled a cultivator or anything like that. They're kind of get to the point where this is what they're doing. They're part of the competition. And it's losing the plot. It's not a big deal. It's just fun, you know. We have our dog, Willow, is a Sheltie, in other words, a Shetland sheepdog. She wouldn't know a sheep if it bit her on the lips. She just, but it's just part of the thing, that we sometimes, we get these pets, we go to fairs and stuff, and we lose the plot. Now, it's a little bit different if you lose the plot in life. Like, for instance, you begin to think, about your house, that it's a showpiece instead of a place to live. Or that your car, instead of being a place to get from A to B, is kind of an extension of how important you are. Or your clothes, instead of being something that you put on your body, to cover things up and keep warm and stuff, it becomes something else. And we do that with things. We kind of lose the plot sometimes with our lives. And sometimes when it comes to the most important things in life, which is our faith and what is going to happen for all of eternity, we lose the plot. We lose the plot. And that's not a good thing. Now, Jesus with his disciples, and this is where the whole thing of the chosen comes in. We see him, and he basically, in this episode, he's working with people, and he's got all these people that he's healing. And the way this worked is a couple of his disciples went to Syria, which was really not the Jewish people at all. But he went up to Syria, it was like a 4-hour trip, and he sent some people out to scout it out because he heard that people up there wanted to come and be healed and wanted to come and see him. And when they got up there, they realized people were already starting to line up knowing that he was going to be there. And that actually makes sense. I mean, you're in desperation. There's no hospitals. There's no care facilities. And so you've got people who are paralyzed, people who are blind, people who can't hear, people whose children are demon-possessed. And it's just all this chaos. And they find out that somebody can come and help them. And they begin lining up for Jesus to come. So that's what happens in the episode here, is that all these people were there to see Jesus, and his disciples kind of lose the plot. Let me read the actual record written by Matthew. Jesus traveled throughout the region of Galilee, teaching in the synagogues, announcing the good news about the kingdom, and he healed every kind of disease and illness. News about him spread as far as Syria, and people soon began bringing to him all who were sick. Whatever their sickness or disease, or if they were demon-possessed or epileptic or paralyzed, he healed them. Large crowds followed him wherever he went. People from Galilee, the 10 towns, Jerusalem, from all over Judea, and from the east of the Jordan River. So imagine what it would be like to be one of Jesus' students, okay? So the person that you're following, the person that you're with, he's healing thousands of people. Like, anybody who comes is healed. Thousands of people gather to hear him teach, and his popularity is spreading throughout the whole country. So his disciples, at this point, are kind of on a high, and they're beginning to grasp, what it means to be the Messiah, but they haven't fully gotten it yet, because they think that the Messiah is coming to get rid of the Romans. And that's what you begin to see here. So they expected Jesus, son of David, to be kind of a mixture of Schwarzkopf and Schwarzenegger, to come and just take care of all the enemies, clean out the whole country. And what we see is they just have some very human dreams and ambitions, I mean, they were a lot like you and me. They're talking about, well, there are 3 themes that I see. One of them is we hate the Romans and we hope that they die. The second one, basically, they talk about the stuff, that they have, which would include, their dreams of fame and their ambitions and their grievances and so on. And the third thing is just that Jesus' enormous power just becomes part of normal operation. That's just what they are. So they kind of lose the plot. And that's kind of the point of what this whole thing is. Now, I understand that this can happen. It's happened to the Israelites. Remember, they saw God split the sea. God inflicted all kinds of diseases on the Egyptians. God's presence was with them day and night in a cloud, by day, and a pillar of fire by night. I mean, they saw this all, and yet when it really came right down to it, they're sitting, sucking their thumbs, griping about the quality of food that they have. We talked a little bit about that last week, how that they saw astounding things, and yet they lost the plot. And the same thing, I think, begins to happen with Jesus' disciples. Jesus is God. Jesus is the one who made everything that exists out there. They're following him. They're watching what he does. And yet, the supernatural, the powerful, almost becomes ordinary. And that happens a lot of times to us. See, And here's what's really interesting too, and that is that they were ordinary people. That's why this happened. And our thought is that, if God's going to do something spectacular, well, he needs spectacular people. Like he needs the brightest of the bright. He needs the people who are in the gifted class. He needs the cream of the crop, the people, the up and rising, the Steve Jobs, all these people who are brilliant and creative and so on. But actually, God just uses ordinary people, and you know why? It's because when people, are told that they're great and they begin to see themselves as great, pride gets in the way. And it's the ultimate contaminant of the human soul. And it basically keeps us from being used by God. Now, Paul, who was an amazing man, he kind of understood this really well. Because he had this group, the Corinthian church, that he wrote 2 letters to. And they kind of got after him. Like, the implication, behind their smirks was, well, he's kind of, he's kind of at the shallow end of the gene pool, when it comes to his talent and when it comes to his brains and so on. And he writes this letter to this group of people who are kind of thinking this way. And he says, remember, dear brothers and sisters, that a few of you were wise in the world's eyes or powerful or wealthy when God called you. Instead, and this would include me, God chose things that the world considers foolish in order to shame those who think that they're wise. And he chose things that are powerless to shame those who are powerful. God chose things despised by the world, things counted as nothing at all, and used them to bring to nothing what the world considers important. And as a result, in other words, this is the bottom line. No one can boast. No one can say, well, you can all understand why God chose me. That doesn't happen because God can choose anybody he wants. I mean, he created humans out of a handful of dirt and breathed into it, and he still works that way. He takes these little handfuls of dirt that we are, and he breathes life into us through his Spirit and enables us to do things that are way beyond anything that we could ever accomplish. And so if you're reading what the gospel records say, about the chosen, about the disciples, and you think to yourself, what's wrong with them? Like, why aren't they getting, these guys are not the sharpest knife in the drawers, You have to remember, they wrote this, okay? They wrote all the records, so they're writing about themselves, and that's what they're saying. We're ordinary people. Like, when this whole thing started, we didn't get it. We didn't understand what God was up to. And Jesus makes it clear where we will always find him, and it's really interesting where we find him. We find him among the poor in spirit, people who have nothing to offer. We find him among those who mourn. They'll be comforted. We find him among those who really want to do what's right, but sometimes don't have a clue how to do it. And then, of course, among the meek, among the humble. And that's who he blesses. Humility is kind of the bottom line entry requirement to be used by God. If you won't humble yourself, there's no way he can use you. So let me mention again, the theme of the Jewish culture back in 30 AD is the hatred that people have for the Roman occupation. I mean, they hate it. And I understand. I would too if I lived there, Most people have been reduced to poverty by the Romans, because of their taxes. I mean, yeah, Roman taxes paid for a great highway system, and for protection, but you were actually paying the bullies who patrolled the streets to keep your town under control. Had nothing to do with a better life. And money, as you know, is the sore spot for most people. You can always tell because when you touch it, they jump and yell, okay? And you can understand why people treated the tax collectors like Matthew like they were the scum of the earth. I mean, they had basically joined up, gotten in bed with the Romans so that they could make money from it. And that's what Matthew had done. By his own confession, he had owned a house by the time he was 14, and people scrambled to even keep their houses with all the taxes. If you lived then and you knew that God was going to send a Messiah to save you, to rescue you, what would you think? Well, the normal thing is he's going to kick out the people who are making our lives miserable, which would have been the Romans, okay? So let me set up the scene for this episode. Jesus had announced his intent to make this 4-hour trip, and so they made this 4-hour trip, and they end up there in Syria, and there's people already waiting in line. So you just imagine if you're blind or you're paralyzed or you have a child that's dying or you have a spouse that's demon-possessed and life is just crazy wherever you go. There's just desperation and there's chaos. And so Jesus goes up and he begins healing people right away, And so the disciples, they go about 100 yards, kind of down this little hill, and they set up camp there and are kind of sitting around the campfire. Jesus needs a couple of his disciples to come up and help with the line because, well, desperate people do desperate things. And what's interesting is what's happening. Everybody that goes up to this little booth where Jesus is gets healed. Like, there are phenomenal things happening there. People who go there and they're missing pieces because of leprosy, and they're getting new fingers and getting new faces. And kids who walk in carried in blind by their parents are leading their parents out by the hand because they can see everything for the first time, It's just amazing. It's just amazing what is happening. Now, here's what's important to understand. These people are right at the very center of who Jesus came to rescue. He said he came to seek and to save what's lost. It doesn't make any difference what country they're in or what area they're in. He came to save them. And if you look at the bullseye, they are at the very center of the bullseye. That's what he's doing. He's saving these people. They're believing in him because of what he's doing. But the people, the disciples back at the campfire, they've gotten used to this. You think about it, what if somebody had their camera, their cell phone up there, and they're filming this whole thing. They're filming people who are paralyzed getting up and dancing, and they're filming people who are blind, and now they can see. I mean, if you and I, if we played that here on this screen, we'd all be clapping and gasping and crying as we watched it. We wouldn't get enough of it. But they're sitting back around the campfire, and they're kind of talking. I mean, it's just normal conversation. They're talking about, what it would feel like to be famous. They're talking about money. They're talking about things. They're kind of playing games. Now, we play games too. Sometimes we play Trivial Pursuit. Anybody ever played this game? This is an old one from back in the 80s, really cool, So if you're playing Trivial Pursuit, is that okay? What if it's Bible Trivial Pursuit and you know all the answers? Is that cool? Big one in our culture is Monopoly. I mean, this is a big deal, what you do with your money and how much you can get and how much you can accumulate before you die. I mean, the problem is, you see, that the time is on. And we've only got so much time to do what God has called us to do, what God created us to do. And that's where we have to figure it out when it comes to not losing the plot in life. So they're back there, the line's long, and they've had a long day. And what you find is what happens a lot of times around religious people, they begin complaining, Well, why couldn't this have happened tomorrow instead of today? I mean, we're dog-tired, we've been walked for 4 hours this morning, And some desperate guy, came brushing by me and knocked me over, and I cut my hand, And some guy's all enthusiastic about his wife getting healed, bumped into me, and by the way, these people would not believe if Jesus wasn't healing them. I mean, is that even, theologically correct that he's doing that? So there's all this stuff that's going on. And it's just normal conversation among people who've gotten used to seeing the miraculous thing that God does. But then the real expectations start to emerge. And those expectations are, and they basically begin with, well, he's the son of David, isn't he the Messiah? When is he going to start killing the Romans, And they begin to talk about some of their revenge fantasies. Have you ever had a revenge fantasy? Most of us have, And so, Big James basically says, I used to practice with this sword, this wooden sword when I was a kid, just dreaming that one day with the Messiah I'd be able to kill all the Romans on my street, And then Raymond says, I used to dream about, them coming into my house and me hiding under the bed, and then the Messiah coming, right at the last moment. Here I come to save the day, and rescuing me out of all this stuff. So they had all these revenge fantasies. Well, Jesus said, I came to seek and save the lost, which would include the Romans, by my estimation. And then the conversation shifts from there to, what they experience, by being close to somebody who's healing people by the thousands, somebody who's famous, And I think John says, well, I kind of like being famous. You ever had a thought about that? Anybody ever not thought about being famous sometime, and having crowds look up at you with wonder, and awe and so on? Like we all dream about being famous, right? And so did they. And then Andrew gets into his imaginary what-if question. They begin talking about money, What would you do if you could have unlimited money, by doing something, And so they think, well, like what? Like losing fingers, losing hands, not getting married, What if you could have? And so we think about that too. What if we had unlimited money, like no limits whatsoever? The game of Monopoly. And then there's something that kind of brings all these topics front and center with money and with power and fame. and it's Matthew. Because you see, he was in bed with the Romans. Like, he was making all this money. He had his own house, was making more than his dad by the time he was 9 years old, So he represents all these topics, and the hostility seems to just kind of descend on him, and they go after him. So, Matthew, what was it like to have all that money, where you traded God, you traded your country, and traded everything else in for the money? What was that like? What did that feel like, And why now? Why have you decided now that you want to follow Jesus? Is it that you want to add a little bit of fame to all the things that you've already had? I mean, what was that like? And then he asked, well, what do you want me to do? I don't know what you're expecting of me. And they said, we expect an apology. Now, that sounds right. I mean, it would make sense. But all of this hostility has landed on him. And instead of humility, what you see all this junk come pouring out. Implication was, well, you don't belong with us. Like, we've been Jews, like we've been there through the whole thing, like we've suffered, we've had all these rules to follow, and there was foods that we didn't eat, and we experienced the problem of other people occupying our country for the last 500 years. Like, you haven't experienced any of that. So why are you doing this now? Why are you coming out now and you want to follow Jesus when you were in bed with the Romans? Now, what I want you to see first, okay? This kind of comes to this climax here where they're going after him. And so this is visually, okay, with my vision, which is a little strange anyways. This is what it's like. This was the plan. Jesus was going to go, God was going to get the glory by the people who came to him, and they came probably by the hundreds to be healed. That was the plan. Seek and save the lost. Sitting around the campfire. That's a different story, isn't it? You got this stuff that's going on. Well, what about the Romans? And what about Matthew? And what about money? And what about fame? And so on. So they're sitting around the campfire there, and they're going through all this stuff. Now, the conversation isn't all bad in this. I mean, in this whole process, Mary talks about what it was like to give birth to Jesus and how difficult it was and how it was hard to understand that he was the Son of God when he was crying and shivering and covered with all this stuff she had to clean off. So there are some really good parts to this conversation. It's just that Jesus, at this point, is in a different place, and they're like down here, and they're not even watching, seemingly even caring what's going on up there. In fact, they're kind of complaining about the problems that they've had with him. Now, I've been a part of the church. Jesus gathered people my whole life. My first time in church, I was probably 2 weeks old at the most, and I've been to church 2 or 3 times a week ever since then, I bleed little crosses when I cut myself, and it struck me how this scene could kind of be a little bit like the church, where we're kind of around the campfire, singing Kumbaya, holding hands, and complaining about one another, and talking about our money and talking about, how we want God to solve our problems and save our pigs, And what's happening sometimes is in a different place, what Jesus is doing. And my understanding of following Jesus is you go where he's going, you join him in what he's up to, and that's where the blessing is. Now, there's the messy times, there's the difficult times, there's the chaotic things, up on the mountain. There's always when desperate people are gathered, there's always a problem there. But what I realize is that everyone in Jesus' group is a novice, okay? So I understand this. This is at the beginning of the story, John makes the comment, I'm embarrassed that I don't really even know what's going on, what's being expected of me. So I understand that. The problem is that, they're 3 years in. They've been hanging around with God day and night for 3 years. And it's 2 weeks before the cross. And they're still arguing about who's the greatest. In fact, it gets to the point where James and John say, Jesus, could we have the number 2 and number 3, thrones beside you? We don't want the big one, but the number 2, number 3 spots, Jesus said, he gets in their faces. He says, you don't even know what you're asking for. And it was true. He says, my kingdom isn't about being big and powerful. My kingdom is not about being famous because you're hanging around me. My kingdom is about serving. The Son of Man came to seek and save what was lost. He came to serve and not be served. So here's what I know. When your question, when you come into a church is like this, what about me? Then it's kind of an indication that you've lost the plot. Maybe you knew, whatever, and it's right to ask that question. But when you've been around the church for a while and you're still asking, well, what about me? What about me? What about me? What about the temperature? What about, and all this stuff that really has to do with you, there's an indication that you kind of have lost the plot, that we are here to serve and not be served. Just like the disciples, let me get into another area, and I hope I'm not going to dwell here very long, but they lived in a politically charged environment. And like these early disciples, we can begin to think that, that things are not going to be okay until our favorite political candidate gets into office and so on. And the problem in our world is it's not a political problem. It's a sin problem. And that's the one that Jesus came to save. And I'll tell you what, I don't care who gets in there, whatever happens, it's not about getting the right candidate, because Jesus can, he has all authority in heaven and on earth. He seats and unseats political people. Like, that's not a problem for him. In fact, if you follow him, you have to ask the question. I mean, he's God, shows up on this planet. Who would he vote for? The Pharisees, or was it the Sadducees, or the Essenes, or was it the Zealots, or maybe was it Herod's party, or maybe Caesar, or maybe, the Independent Green Party of Galilee? I just made that one up. But I mean, there were all kinds of parties. And what you find out is he did not join any of them. In fact, what he actually did was he came and he changed the whole Roman Empire by the way his people loved them and gave their lives and served them. Interesting, isn't it, that they would be thinking that he's going to come and kill all the Romans when Jesus decided to save the Romans and use them for his glory. So that's enough about politics, okay? Vote your conscience, and, vote your heart out. But don't think that the future of the world depends on, the outcome of any political election, because it doesn't. Jesus holds all the cards. He holds all authority and power in heaven and on earth. And he cares about you. See, you don't have to try and, kind of convince him to care about you by, some special prayer that you pray. He knows how many hairs you have. He knows how many hairs you don't have. He knows which ones are yours and which ones aren't yours. He knows which ones are natural color and dyed. He knows which ones are glued on. He knows all these things about us. He knows what kind of food you need. He knows what kind of work you need. He knows the kind of money that you need to carry on and to care for your family and do the things that you're supposed to do. So you don't have to, be all worried and fussing about that stuff. He will hear your prayers. He will answer your prayers, but he cares about that. You don't have to make that the kind of the bottom line denominator in your life. What he does ask for, though, is he asks for us to do something that is totally unusual in this world. And that's basically to not hold on to our own lives. In fact, this is what he said. He said, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way and take up your cross daily and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you'll lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world? But you yourself are lost or destroyed. If anyone is ashamed of me and my message, the Son of Man will be ashamed of that person when he returns in his glory and the glory of the Father and the holy angels. See, the unusual thing that Jesus did was he flipped the Roman Empire upside down, because love changes everything. And that's what changed things. It was the way these people, his followers, his disciples, loved their enemies. Not said, we vote against you, we protest against you. They loved their enemies, and the love changed everything. That's the surprise. That's what he's up to. And the truth is that in the world system that we live in, if you follow it and listen to it, and you do what it tells you to do and be afraid of the things it tells you to be afraid of, you will be out to save your life. Because just about every ad on TV or on social media or whatever will basically say, you got to save your life. Nobody else is interested in you, so you got to look out for number one. You got to make sure it happens. You got to make sure you save up enough money, have the right insurance, the right car, and all the other things. Jesus said, if you put your life first, you're going to lose it. In other words, the whole thing of, trying to save your life, the whole thing of, trying to make sure that you don't, that you don't die before you, well, that's going to happen anyways. What you get a chance to do is follow the mission of Jesus, which is to serve others, to make the difference in this world that you were created to make. And this means you got to give up doing things your own way. Means you got to be careful whose advice you listen to, because you can lose the plot. You got to follow Jesus, not just admire him from afar and be one of his best fans. Number one thing that people need for people who stay on mission is to serve. That's what he's called us to do. He said, I came here. I left heaven. I came here to serve, not be served. And that's what he expects of those who follow him. Well, the conversation around the campfire, gets incredibly heated, and let's take a break and let's watch what happens, what interrupts the whole thing. Let's watch this for a minute.
Do you even know what it's like to be Jewish? To suffer for centuries and centuries because of it, but to still commit to it? To protect our heritage even though it never stops being painful, because the one comfort we have is to know that we're doing it together. That we're all suffering together. But if we just wait a little longer, if we hold tight just a little more, we'll have rescue, because we're chosen, all of us. And you betrayed that, and you spit on it. I can't forgive it. I'll never forgive it.
All right. You said what you needed to say. Sit down, Simon.
You sit down first. Good night. Ima. Thank you.
You got blood on your hands. One more. There we go.
I'm a mess. Good. What would I do without you, Ima?
Get some sleep.
Okay. I'm so tired. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings sleep to my eyes and slumber to my eyelids. May it be your will, Lord my God, and God of my ancestors, that I lie down in peace, and that I arise in peace.
So they're on a rant against Matthew, and they're chewing him up and down, and they're standing up and ready to fight, and all of a sudden, Jesus walks by. And he's been up on the hillside all day. They've been, doing things, playing games, having this conversation, eating supper and so on. He's been up there the whole day. And he comes back, and he's just bagged. You can tell he's just exhausted. He's got blood spattered on him. And he just walks by, and he says, good night, without supper, without anything else. And he walks over to his tent. And there's this incredibly tender scene that you see here. As Mary, Ima, comes over and helps him to wash his feet and help him to wipe the blood off of himself. And it just goes quiet. See, from what Jesus told us, and I believe what he says because he's been right about everything else, there's going to come a day when he's going to walk beside the campfire that we're hanging around. He's going to come back again someday. And he told us in his last messages that what he wants from us is, first of all, to be ready. He said, don't be dumb about this. Be ready. The second thing he said is, you want to invest. You've got to invest. It's not enough to dig a hole in the ground and bury everything I've given you and keep it for some future day, because the future day is what you will want to have invested in. And then the final thing that he says is, you got to love. You've got to love. It's going to be, on the record, like, if you want to find me, I'm going to be around the people who don't have a home, and people who are naked, and people who need something to eat, and people who need something to drink, and people who are lonely and in prison and hospitals and need somebody to visit them. That's where I'm going. He says, you want to remember to love, because it's on the final exam. It's on the final exam. Big deal. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, serve. Be ready, invest, and love. That's our calling. That's the plan. Let's pray. God, help us to make really good decisions before we run out of time, to invest our lives in your mission, and not just try to get to heaven when we die, but to serve you and give our lives to something that is way, way, way bigger, way more important than we are. Help us to see it. Help us to do it. Amen. So may God help you this week and stay by your side. May you remember that he's right there with you wherever you go, and help you to stay on mission, because there are people who need you to be on mission. Amen.